Hello, today we are going to learn the first chapter of Footprints Without Feet, a supplementary textbook prescribed for 10th grade students studying in CBSE board. The title of the chapter is A Triumph of Surgery, authored by James Herriot, an English veterinary surgeon and writer. Being a noted veterinary surgeon, Mr. James Herriot utilized his vast experience in writing stories about animals. He wrote a series of stories or books that dealt with animals and their masters. Our present story, that is A Triumph of Surgery, it is a story about the narrator himself, who was, as I said, a veterinary surgeon who saves the life of a listless or lazy dog by hospitalizing him in order to prevent him from being overfed by his mistress or owner, Mrs. Pumphrey, which was only worsening his condition, the condition of the dog. So see how we can correlate this story to the writer's personal experience. The writer was a veterinary surgeon. So no wonder he has written this story in which he saves the life of a dog who was being overfed or who was being pampered, who was being taken too much care by his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. So with this viewpoint, let's learn this chapter. Now, before we go into the details of the story, let's see how many characters are there in this story. There are three main characters in the story. Number one is the surgeon himself, who is James Herriot, a veterinary surgeon. Number two is Mrs. Pumphrey, who is the mistress of Tricky, mistress of a dog. And number three, obviously, none other than the dog himself. The name of the dog is Tricky. So these are the three main characters in this story. Now let's understand what is there in the story. As the story opens, we find that the narrator, the writer or the surgeon is quite worried. He is very worried. We read it in the first line itself. I was really worried about Tricky this time. This is how the story opens. So the surgeon was worried. Why was he worried? As we read further, we come across that since Tricky had become, who was Tricky? The dog. The dog had become hugely fat, very fat. He had become like a blotted sausage. So his condition was very bad. He had become very plummy, and the surgeon could see that the weight that he was gaining, the weight that he was putting on was not a healthy weight, it was unhealthy. Now, on inquiring the reason, he came to know that his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, was taking too much care. She was pampering the dog. She was feeding him with malt, cod liver oil, and a ball of Horlicks every day. So at regular intervals, the dog was being fed with these things. And that's what we understand, that the mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, was taking too much care. The care that was not going to result in anything but bad to this dog. As we read further, the surgeon understands, the surgeon knows that the problem with the dog was that he was known not to avoid food. He liked eating and eating and eating. We read in one of the paragraphs, if you have the NCERT book on a page number, which is the page number, it is page number 1 itself. We read that he says, that was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. That means Tricky was never known to avoid food. He was quite greedy. He liked eating and eating. You know, there are some people, even in practical life, no matter how much they have eaten, if you just give them, they would eat and eat and eat. See, this is what happened even with this dog. Now, the doctor or the surgeon advises Mrs. Pumphrey to make the dog do some exercise and also to keep him on a strict diet, otherwise he might fall ill. The doctor could easily anticipate, the doctor could easily understand that if this condition persisted, if this situation continued, it is sure that the dog is going to fall ill because he is being overfed. So he advises the owner, the mistress, to take care and to help him do some exercise. Now, the doctor knew that it is very unlikely that the mistress would make him exercise and cut short on his diet. He knew that. And according to his thought, or according to his anticipation, he got a call not very late. He received a call in which Mrs. Pumphrey appeared to be quite worried. She said, that Tricky has stopped eating anything. Moreover, he has bouts of vomiting. This is what the news given to. This was the news given to the surgeon by Mrs. Pumphrey. Now, the surgeon advises that Tricky had to be hospitalized for at least a fortnight. A fortnight is a period of 14 days, I hope you know. Interestingly, the word fortnight is a combination or is a blend of two words, 14 nights. And when we blend it, it becomes a fortnight. So a fortnight is a period of 2 weeks or 14 nights. So he said that the dog had to be hospitalized for 14 nights or for 2 weeks. Now, as we read further in the story, we read that at the surgery, when the doctor took the dog after an emotional parting, indeed it was an emotional parting. Why? Because Mrs. Pumphrey did not want to part herself with the dog. So it was an emotional parting, which I guess you yourself can read and understand. We will not go into the details of it, but let's see what happens later on. At the surgery, we read that the household dogs surged round Tricky. He saw them lying motionless. Then we read that the surgeon made a bed for Tricky in a warm loose box. For 2 days, no food was given to Tricky. See, the doctor knew, the surgeon knew that this condition, this present condition was only because the dog had been overfed. The dog was being overfed. For 2 days, the dog was kept only on water. No food was given to him. And on the second day, for 2 days, only water was given to him. And on the second day, he starts taking some interest in the surroundings. He starts to whimper on the third day. So gradually a mild improvement is seen from the second day onwards, and it continues to the third day and the days ahead. Then as we read further, we understand that Tricky's progress was quite rapid. He was recovering in a very rapid way, at a very rapid pace, in spite of the fact that no medical treatment was given of any kind. We see that he runs with the other dogs. He joins their friendly barkings. He fights for his share of food, and moreover, he hunts rats at night. That means he has become very active. He has become very agile. His plummy condition starts going away. It starts fading, and he becomes active. He has become active. Now, all this while, we read in the text that Mrs. Pumphrey was quite worried. She did not know what was going on with the dog. We read in one of the paragraphs on page number 4, it says, all the while Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. So see, as I told you in the beginning itself, she was very attached to the dog, and that is the reason she pampered the dog. So she was quite worried what the condition of the dog might be. So she kept on ringing, she kept on calling the surgeon what was going on with the dog. And as soon as she came to know that the condition of the dog was getting improved, it was improving, see, we read that she starts sending eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build his strength. Moreover, she also sends wine and brandy to improve Tricky's condition. Once the condition has improved, again the same thing she is repeating. Although I am sure she must have known that this condition was only because of not making the dog exercise and just overfeeding the dog. Knowing all these things, she still sends many eatables for the dog. And then we see that after 2 weeks, the surgeon realizes that it was time for Tricky to be sent home, and he informs his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, that she could come and collect the dog. When Tricky sees his mistress, he leaps and sails into her lap. And then as we come to the end of the story, we read that as the car moves away, Mrs. Pumphrey leans out of the window. She has become highly emotional. She knows that it was only because of this surgeon, James Herriot, that the condition of the dog has improved. We read that tears shone in her eyes. I am at the last paragraph, perhaps the last few lines in the story. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Herriot," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." So she realized, she understood that it was only because of James Herriot, the veterinary surgeon. She wanted to thank him from the bottom of her heart. So here comes the end of this story. I think this is what happens even in the practical lives. There are some parents who are known to pampering their children, who are known to taking too much care of their children. They think that the love can only be expressed by giving their children whatever they desire, whatever they wish. I think it is a point that we ought to learn, give them only what is needed, only what is necessary, not what they desire. Their desires are not necessary to be met, but their needs. Because sometimes, if we meet all their desires, it may work for their worse. It may work for their bad, not for their betterment. Thank you so much for watching this video.